My name is Michelle. Standing in the courthouse hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing above me, I clutched a file with my name on it. Across from me, my lawyer, Mr. Thompson, flipped through papers with a calmness that comes from having seen every kind of human greed. The judge had just announced a permanent restraining order against my mother, Diana, and my half-brother, Leo. The words rang out like a bell, clear and final. As I stepped out into the Florida heat, the sun glaring off the courthouse steps, my phone buzzed with a bank notification. Another failed transfer attempt of $10,000 from my savings. My security protocols had blocked it instantly, but it only proved what I already knew. They hadn't learned a thing. It all started when I was a kid. I grew up in a small townhouse in the outskirts of Miami. My dad, Robert, was a mechanic. His hands were always blackened with grease, but he had a heart of gold. He'd work long hours at the local garage, often coming home exhausted but still managing to ask about my day at school. When I was 10, my mom, Diana, decided to leave. One morning, I woke up to an empty house except for Dad. There was no note, no goodbye. Just the silence that filled the air, louder than any scream. Dad and I were left to pick up the pieces. We didn't have much money. Dad worked hard, but the bills were piling up. I started doing odd jobs, delivering newspapers early in the morning, babysitting for the neighbors in the evenings. Every cent we earned went into a piggy bank we kept on the kitchen counter. It was labeled Future Dreams. Dad was the most positive person I knew. He'd always tell me, "Michelle, tough times show you who people really are." I held on to those words like they were my life raft. Through high school, I studied hard, often falling asleep over my textbooks. And finally, I got a full-ride scholarship to a prestigious university. College was a whirlwind of work and study. I made good grades and landed a well-paying job after graduation. I moved into a nice downtown apartment, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about money. Then, one sunny afternoon, after 25 years, my mom showed up at my door, smiling as if nothing had ever happened. She gave me a big hug and said she'd come to make amends. I was overjoyed at first. I thought she might have finally come back to be a part of my life. But then Leo, my half-brother, sauntered in behind her. He was in his early 20s, with a cocky attitude. Mom started talking about family bonds and how we should help each other. And then she dropped the bombshell. She needed $80,000 for Leo's college tuition and $5,000 a month to cover their living expenses. I just stood there, looking at her in disbelief. This woman who had left me and Dad to struggle alone was now calculating my worth like I was an ATM. I didn't say a word that day. I just showed them the door. But I knew this was just the beginning. A few days later, I got a text from her. "Michelle, can we meet for coffee? I really want to talk." Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. We met at a trendy cafe downtown. The place was filled with people typing on their laptops and sipping lattes. When I walked in, she waved at me, her smile a bit too wide. Leo was sitting in the corner, his headphones on, scrolling through his phone. Mom reached out for my hand and said, "Michelle, I've missed you so much. I've been wanting to explain everything for years." I waited for her explanation. She then launched into a story about how Dad had kept me away from her, how he'd changed our phone numbers and moved us to different neighborhoods, so she couldn't find me. Her words were so polished that they sounded rehearsed. I remembered all those nights when Dad would come home, his face tired, waiting for her call that never came. I looked at her and said softly, "Mom, you know that's not true." She blinked, and the act started to slip. "You think your father's a saint?"
"He's a loser, Michelle."
"He couldn't give you a good life." Leo smirked and said, "Guess he didn't teach you to be generous." I felt a pang in my chest. I stood up and said, "You left. You don't get to rewrite history because you need money." Mom's face hardened. "You'll regret this, Michelle." I just turned and walked out, my hands shaking but my steps firm. I thought that would be the end of it. But a week later, she invited me to lunch. Against my better judgment, I went. This time, we met at a cozy Italian restaurant. When I sat down, Mom looked at me and said, You've been so distant, Michelle. I replied, I've been busy building my life, something you wouldn't understand. She ignored my comment and said, Your father made it impossible for me to be a part of your life. I retorted, You left, Mom. It wasn't him. Leo interrupted. Can we cut the crap? I need a car. I can't go to college without one. And a new laptop. My old one is useless. Mom nodded and said, We were thinking you could help us out with that. Nothing too fancy, just something reliable. I stared at them in shock. You're asking me for all this after I already said no to the tuition? Leo shrugged. You've got the money. What's the big deal? I was fuming. I said, The big deal is that you think I owe you. You think you can come back into my life after all these years and demand things from me. Mom's voice rose. We're family, Michelle. You should help us. I responded, Where was this family when Dad and I were barely getting by? Leo pushed his chair back and said, You're such a joke. You act all high and mighty, but you're still that scared little girl inside. I snapped. You have no idea what it took for me to get where I am today. Mom's face turned cold. You'll regret embarrassing me like this. I stood up and said, No, you'll regret underestimating me. A couple of nights later, there was a buzz at my apartment door. It was late, and I almost didn't answer. But then I heard Mom's voice, sweet and fake. Michelle, honey, can we come up for a minute? I opened the door, hesitantly. There they were, Mom clutching her designer purse, and Leo looking bored. Mom sat down and started looking around my apartment like she was sizing it up. You've done so well for yourself, Michelle. Your dad would be proud. The way she said Dad's name made my skin crawl. Leo plopped down on the couch, put his feet on the table, and started playing with his phone. Nice place, but a bit small. I crossed my arms and asked, What do you want? Mom gave me an innocent look. We just came to talk. It's so nice to be together again, don't you think? I didn't answer. She sighed and said, I know you're mad at me, but I want to make things right. Leo is really struggling, and I don't want him to go through what we did. I almost laughed. We? You left, Mom. You weren't there when we were struggling. She said, I had to do it to survive, Michelle. You don't understand. Just then, I noticed Leo had walked over to my desk. My laptop screen was on, and he was typing. I walked over quickly and asked, What are you doing? He smirked and said, Just checking out your setup. You've got some fancy security, huh? I slammed the laptop shut. Get away from it. Mom stood up and said, Don't be so dramatic. He's just curious. I opened the laptop briefly and saw that he'd opened my bank portal. My blood ran cold. I stared at them and said, You've been trying to get into my accounts, haven't you? Mom said, You have so much money, Michelle. Why are you being so stingy? We're family. I then remembered Dad's email account. I opened the email app and saw unread messages from Mom's address forwarding my income details. I was furious. You hacked Dad's email. How could you? Mom didn't deny it. He's so careless. I needed to know how you were doing. Leo said, You should thank her for caring. I said through gritted teeth, You violated our trust. You're not family. You're just thieves. Mom's mask finally dropped completely. Your father was a failure. I'm the reason you're strong. That was the last straw. I picked up my phone and said, If you don't leave right now, I'll call the police. Mom said, You'd call the police on your own mother? I stared her down. On anyone who crosses the line. They left in a huff, the door slamming behind them. I sat there, my hands shaking. But for the first time, I didn't feel like that helpless little girl. I felt angry and determined. I spent the whole night gathering evidence, the failed login attempts, the forwarded emails, everything. The next day, I contacted Mr. Thompson, the lawyer a colleague had recommended. He listened carefully and said, This is a criminal case. We'll build a strong case against them. I called Dad and told him what had happened. His voice cracked when he heard that she'd used his email. After all these years, she still does this, he said. But then he added, Do what you need to, Michelle. I trust you. 2 weeks later, here I was in the courthouse getting the restraining order. And when I got that bank notification, I forwarded it to Mr. Thompson. His reply was immediate. They just handed you more proof. We'll file additional charges. A month later, word spread through our family. My Aunt Carol called me, her voice filled with regret. Diana has always been like this. She's always looking for an easy way out. You were just the latest target. After that, Diana and Leo faded from my life. There were no more unexpected visits, no more guilt trips, just peace. By winter, I decided to channel my experience into something positive. I started a scholarship fund for kids from low-income families in Miami. I named it the Robert Fund, in honor of Dad. At the launch event, I gave the first scholarship to a young girl who reminded me of myself at 10. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you for believing in me." I smiled and thought, no one should have to earn love with money. A year later, my life was back to normal. My apartment was still my little haven, and I was stronger than ever. I'd stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. Dad came to visit me one spring. He was sitting in my kitchen, sipping coffee from the mug I'd given him that said, "World's Best Dad." He looked at me and said, "You've got my stubbornness, Michelle." And he was right. I'd inherited his strength and determination. One evening, I got an email from a student who'd received the scholarship. The subject line read, "You changed my life." She wrote, "I want to be like you. Independent, fearless, and kind, but not a pushover." I laughed out loud. She really got it. I used to think revenge meant hurting the people who hurt you. But now I know that the real revenge is finding peace, the kind that no one can take away from you. If you've ever had family show up only when there's money involved, I want you to know that you don't owe them anything. You only owe yourself the freedom to live your life. Let me know where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to draw your own line. And if this story resonates with you, hit subscribe. There's more where this came from.